There's been a lot of talk about, settler colonialism as a framework for understanding U.S. history. That is, this idea that people who aren't white Europeans are just kind of incidental and don't really have any rights, and that it's the goal of white Europeans to go and take their land and turn it into create white European outposts around the world. And then these colonizers feel constantly under threat by the people who they have displaced and dispossessed, and that there's an inordinate amount of violence necessary to maintain a settler colonial dominance over a dispossessed population. Settler colonial ideas and analysis are pretty deeply rooted in the U.S. educational system.
No matter how much influence John Smith had over Jamestown, it was always the Virginia Company back in England who held the colony's future in its hands. They provided the funding to start the whole operation and would send food when settlers were running low. But they only knew what Jamestown's leaders wanted them to know. And none of the leaders, not even John Smith, wanted to tell them just how bad things were. The company didn't want to hear bad things either. They were in constant need of new investors. Bad news would scare investors off. As far as anyone back in England knew, the colony was doing fine. Aside from food, the company kept sending over people too. The colony went from the original 140 settlers to 500 settlers by the time John Smith left. Most of them were skilled artisans, people who couldn't farm but needed to be fed all the same. Before his accident, Smith told the company that the next ship they sent over better have food and farmers who can grow food. They certainly weren't going to get any more food from Powhatan. As far as he was concerned, he gave the English more than enough chance to join his empire, and they responded with lies and attacks. The English who had joined Powhatan told him that Jamestown was completely dependent on him for food. All he needed to do was wait until they starved. So that is exactly what he did. And so the winter of 1609 to 1610 is what would be called the starving time in Jamestown. Without help from Powhatan, the 500 settlers had to eat whatever was left from the last food delivery from England. After they ate that, they were relegated to trapping rats. After that, they started boiling their shoes to eat the leather. After that, they ate the bark off trees. And after that, they ate each other. One man killed his wife and ate parts of her body throughout the winter. Of the 500 settlers who lived in Jamestown at the start of the winter, 60 were left, and things weren't looking good for them either. When the spring finally rolled around, an odd little ship called the Patience appeared off the coast of Jamestown. The 100 passengers on board the Patience had been through horrors of their own. The Virginia Company had sent them there from England at the start of 1609, before Smith's accident or the starving time. But they got blown off course and ended up stranded on the island of Bermuda. Their ship was destroyed, and they survived off the little food they had while they built the new ship, which became the Patience. They sailed from Bermuda up to Jamestown, hoping their horrors were at an end. They arrived there, saw the fort and the houses, but no people. One of them rang the church bell to signal to anyone who might be listening that they were there. Slowly, people crept out of the houses, and it was a ghastly sight. Everyone was a walking skeleton. What kind of place was this? The passengers of the Patience realized that their only choice was to take these 60 poor souls with them and hope their little ship could make it across the Atlantic Ocean back to England. The Jamestown experiment was over. They made it to the end of the Chesapeake Bay when they encountered yet another weird boat. This one even smaller than the Patience. There was only one man on it. An Englishman with a note from the Virginia Company. The note said that another, bigger ship was 2 days away with 150 more settlers and enough food to last a year. The Patience returned to Jamestown and, sure enough, the settlers and food arrived as promised. These new arrivals were led by a man named Thomas West, also known as Lord Delaware. As it turned out, the Virginia Company listened to John Smith. Most of the 150 new arrivals were farmers. There were a few single women on board too. Maybe now people in Jamestown could get married and have kids. Maybe this meant Jamestown was here to stay. It certainly seems so, especially because Lord Delaware had a letter from the Virginia Company making him governor for life. One of his first acts as governor was to meet with Powhatan personally and demand he return whatever tools he stole from Jamestown. Powhatan laughed this off, fully intent on continuing his policy of starving the English into submission. On his way back from the meeting, Delaware stopped in a village occupied by a Native American group called the Paspahegh, a group loyal to Powhatan. Delaware kidnapped the Paspahegh queen and her young children, putting them on a boat bound for Jamestown. Out of nowhere, Delaware's men threw the children overboard and shot them as they struggled in the water. They brought the queen back to Jamestown and ran her through with swords. The policy of viciousness started by John Smith entered a new, more intense phase, as did his policy of making alliances with other Native Americans. One of the groups Delaware befriended were the Potawatomis, some of Powhatan's most hated foes. He hatched a plan with the Potawatomis to carry out another kidnapping, this time of Powhatan's beloved daughter, Pocahontas. Delaware demanded that Powhatan return everything he stole, release any English prisoners he held, and give him a whole bunch of food if he wanted to see Pocahontas again. Delaware probably didn't need any of this stuff. It was really a contest over who held power in Virginia, him or Powhatan. Powhatan knew this better than anyone, which explains why he wasn't in a rush to comply with Delaware's demands. Delaware got impatient and brought Pocahontas to him in person to make the exchange. This is where Pocahontas would, once again, make history. She said she wanted to stay with the English. They treated her well and taught her their language and religion. What choice did Powhatan have now? He loved his daughter, and he certainly couldn't force her to come back. He had to accept her wishes, which meant he also had to accept the English as allies. The question still remained, were the English part of his empire, or was he part of England's empire? Only time would tell. Pocahontas' decision, like her decision to save John Smith, remains a bit of a mystery. It probably was true that the English treated her well. Something else that was true was that she fell in love with an Englishman named John Rolfe. Rolfe was having a tough time since landing in America. He was one of the passengers aboard the Patience, the ship that got stuck in Bermuda before arriving in Jamestown during the starving time. His young daughter died while stranded in Bermuda, and his wife died shortly after landing in Jamestown. He was a broken man by the time Pocahontas came along. He was also pushing 30 years old, and Pocahontas was still a teenager when they got married. By all accounts, they did seem to love each other, whatever that meant at the time. She adopted the Christian name Rebecca. Not only was the marriage good for Rolfe, it was good for Jamestown and the Virginia Company. For Jamestown, it meant they didn't have to worry about Powhatan's attacks or attempts to starve them. For the Virginia Company, it meant a Native American princess was learning the English language and Protestant religion. Wasn't this one of the goals of the colony in the first place? Didn't this prove that the colony was successful? Most importantly, couldn't the company use this as advertising to encourage more investors? They invited Pocahontas to visit the city of London so that people could see for themselves the lovely young princess who accepted their language and God. The streets of London were packed with people who wanted to catch a glimpse of her. Pocahontas had never seen such a crowded, dirty, smoky, loud place before. She even met King James, the guy who all the places back in America were named after. Unfortunately, London was too crowded, dirty, smoky, and loud. She got sick, went downhill fast, and died in 1617. Powhatan died a year later. The bonds of alliance between the Powhatan and the English were gone. The new Powhatan chief became, you guessed it, Opechancanough, Powhatan's brother who always hated the English. He would have killed them all off if not for his brother, who preferred diplomacy to war. Now that his brother was gone, Opechancanough could finally unleash hell. He launched relentless attacks on Jamestown, including a deadly raid in 1622 that wiped out a third of its population. In response, the English declared all-out war of their own on all Native Americans, even the ones not part of Powhatan's empire, even natives who had helped them. This was more than viciousness. This was genocidal. What was going on? Looking back now, Pocahontas probably had the right idea in that winter of 1607 when he first captured John Smith with the intention to kill him. If he had declared all-out war at that point, Jamestown probably would have been wiped out, and history would have been much different. But of course, U.S. history's first great man, Powhatan, didn't let it happen, allowing the other great man, John Smith, to gain a foothold in America. Being great is not just a matter of being great, it's about being there at the right time. There have probably been many people throughout history, names we will never know, who had immense talent and vision but never got the chance to show it on the stage of history. Conversely, there have been many mediocre people to whom history has given a platform. Looking at you, most American presidents. As the saying goes, it's better to be lucky than good. And so it was for Powhatan and John Smith, two men who, due to their circumstances, had the fate of civilizations riding on their decisions. Of course, they couldn't know this at the time. Pocahontas was extremely talented in his own right, but he was just a little too early to slip into the role of a great man. By the time he was finally able to put his plan into effect, it was too late. Jamestown was already too big to kill. The situation had already overtaken him. We will examine how these circumstances changed along with the people who may have been too early, too late, or just on time to be great.